The moon hung like a silver wound in the black sky, its light too cold, too sharp. Around me the forest breathed with the power of the pack, a living entity of growls, snapping branches, and the thick, musky scent of shifted fur. They were celebrating the blood moon, a night of primal strength, while I stood at the edge of the firelight, a ghost in my own skin. The silence inside me was a hollow ache, a cavern where my wolf was meant to dwell. Tonight, their power felt like a physical blow, each proud howl a reminder of the emptiness I carried. I was an omega, the lowest of the low, but worse than that, I was broken. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than the autumn air, that the pack would not let me forget it. The laughter began as a low ripple, cruel and familiar. It came from Kalen, our pack's alpha, his chest puffed with arrogance as he stood silhouetted against the roaring bonfire. His eyes, the color of dirty gold, found me in the shadows. "Look," he sneered, his voice carrying easily over the crackle of burning pine. "The wolfless wonder graces us with her presence." His words were the signal. Two of his betas, Gareth and Lyra, peeled away from the crowd. Their movements were fluid, predatory. I tried to shrink back, to melt into the ancient oaks behind me, but there was nowhere to run. My feet were rooted to the cold, damp earth, my body paralyzed by a lifetime of the same shame. They grabbed my arms, their grips bruising, their knuckles digging into my flesh. I didn't fight. Fighting only made it worse. They dragged me from the relative safety of the shadows and into the center of the clearing, pushing me into the circle of hard-packed dirt where rituals were performed. The heat of the fire licked at my back, but the stares of the pack were hotter, more searing. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the feeling of the dirt beneath my bare feet, trying to ground myself in something other than their contempt. "On this night," Kalen boomed, circling me like a vulture, "we honor the strength of the moon. We honor the spirit of the wolf that makes us mighty." He paused directly in front of me, leaning in so close I could smell the roasted meat on his breath. "And we are reminded that weakness must be purged." A chorus of growls and approving snarls rose from the assembled wolves. They were a wall of glowing eyes and bared teeth. I could feel their collective scorn pressing down on me, a suffocating weight. I kept my head bowed, my long dark hair falling like a curtain to hide my face. To look at them was to invite more pain. To meet their eyes was to acknowledge the truth of their words. I was Lyra Morwen, 21 years of age, and my wolf had never answered my call. On every full moon since my 16th birthday, I had waited, prayed, begged for the fire in my blood to catch, for the shift to break my bones and remake me. But there was only silence, a dead space where a soul-deep connection should have been. I was a failure of bloodline, a genetic dead end. In a world defined by primal power, I had none. "The Alpha King honors us with his presence tonight," Kalen continued, his voice dripping with false reverence. He was trying to impress, to show the visiting monarch how strong and ruthless his pack was, and I was his chosen sacrifice. "A demonstration is in order, a reminder of what happens to those who dilute our blood." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The Alpha King? I hadn't dared to look, hadn't dared to even think about him. His name was a myth, a whisper of terror and power that unified all the packs under one iron-fisted rule. Aldrich Vayner. They said he was more beast than man, that he had won his throne through a dozen bloody challenges, leaving a trail of broken alphas in his wake. They said his scars told the story of 100 battles, and that his wolf was the size of a mountain bear. His presence here was unheard of, a monumental event, and I was about to be humiliated in front of him. "Tell us, Lyra," Lyra hissed from my side, her voice sharp and mocking. "Does the moon hurt you? Or do you feel nothing at all? Just an empty, barren girl, playing at being a wolf." I flinched, biting my lips so hard I tasted the coppery tang of blood. Barren. That was the other curse of the wolfless. No wolf, no mate, no children. I was a vessel of shame, destined to die out. A sudden hush fell over the clearing. It was so abrupt, so absolute, that it was more jarring than the loudest shout. The crackling of the fire seemed to mute. The wind died in the trees. The very air grew thick, heavy with an energy that felt like the moment before a lightning strike. A scent unlike any I had ever known cut through the smoke and pine. The smell of cold stone, ancient forests, and something wild and elemental, like ozone after a storm. No one moved. Every head, including Kalen's, bowed in submission. The pack, which moments ago had been a snarling, jeering mob, was now a sea of lowered heads and trembling shoulders. They were afraid, utterly, primally afraid. Slowly, I lifted my gaze from the dirt at my feet. Through the curtain of my hair, I saw him. He stood at the edge of the firelight, having appeared from the darkness as if he were born of it. The whispers did not do him justice. He was a monolith of a man, broader and taller than any wolf I had ever seen. He was dressed in dark, worn leathers that seemed to absorb the light around him. Scars crisscrossed the exposed skin of his neck and hands, but the most prominent was a jagged line that cut from his left temple down across his cheekbone, pulling at the corner of his mouth in a permanent, subtle snarl. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from my lungs. They were not gold or amber like the others. They were the color of liquid silver, ancient and cold, glowing with an inner light that seemed to see past flesh and bone, right into the tattered remnants of my soul. Aldrich Vayner, the Alpha King, let his gaze sweep over the bowing pack with an expression of profound boredom, bordering on contempt. He dismissed Kalen with a glance that made our Alpha physically shrink. His silver eyes roamed the clearing, taking in the bonfire, the circle, and then they stopped. On me, the world tilted. The air rushed from my lungs in a silent gasp. The stares of the pack had been painful, but this was different. His gaze wasn't mocking. It wasn't filled with pity or disgust. It was focused, intense. As if he were looking at a puzzle he was determined to solve. He saw the torn hem of my tunic, the dirt on my feet, the blood on my lip. He saw the terror in my eyes, the trembling of my hands. He saw it all and he did not look away. Time stretched, becoming thin and brittle. It was just me and him, locked in a silent exchange across the firelit clearing. I felt a strange, terrifying warmth uncurl in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling I had never known, a flicker of something that felt ancient and alive, responding to his presence. It was so foreign that for a moment, I thought it was just fear. Kalen, ever the fool, seemed to misinterpret the king's attention. He cleared his throat, puffing his chest out once more. "My king," he began, his voice strained. "A mere omega, a broken thing of no use. Allow me to present you with a true she-wolf from our pack, one worthy of your notice." The king lifted one hand, a simple, almost lazy gesture, but it held such absolute authority that Kalen's words choked in his throat. Aldrich Vayner's silver gaze never left my face. The silence returned, deeper this time, charged with an impossible tension. Then he spoke. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the ground and up my spine, shaking me to my very core. It was the sound of rock grinding against rock, of a storm gathering on a distant mountain. It was a voice that commanded obedience not through volume, but through sheer, unadulterated power. "She is mine." The two words echoed in the dead quiet of the forest. They hung in the air, solid and irrefutable. The laughter that had plagued my life was gone. The sneers and taunts were silenced. Every ounce of mockery had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, fearful reverence. A collective gasp went through the pack, followed by the sound of bodies dropping lower. Kalen fell to his knees as if his legs had been cut out from under him, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The betas holding my arms released me so quickly I stumbled, catching myself on trembling hands. They scrambled back, their heads bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the dirt. I was left standing alone in the circle, caught between the roaring fire and the unwavering gaze of the Alpha King. The shame I had carried for so long, the familiar weight that had shaped my entire existence, was gone. But what replaced it was 1,000 times heavier, 1,000 times more terrifying. It was the weight of his claim. A claim made on a wolfless broken girl in front of the very people who had delighted in her suffering. My prison of shame had just been shattered, only to be replaced by a cage forged of shadow and moonlight, and I was staring into the eyes of the beast who held the key. The king's words were stones dropped into a silent pool, the ripples spreading outwards as waves of pure, unadulterated shock. For a full 10 seconds, the world remained frozen. Kalen knelt in the dirt, his face ashen. The betas who had held me were practically prostrate, their fear a palpable stench that mixed with the wood smoke. And I simply stood there, my entire being consumed by the echo of 2 words. She is mine. Then he moved. He pushed away from the edge of the trees, and every wolf in the clearing flinched as if struck. His stride was not rushed. It was the slow, deliberate pace of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. The firelight danced across his scarred features, making shadows writhe in the hollows of his cheeks. With each step he took toward the circle, the air grew colder, thinner. My lungs burned for want of it. He was a walking winter storm, and I was trapped directly in his path. His shadow fell over me first, a sudden absence of warmth that raised goosebumps on my arms. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I had to crane my neck to look up at him. He was immense, a figure carved from mountain rock and old grievances. His silver eyes roamed over me again, a slow, methodical assessment from the tangled ends of my hair to my bare, dirt-stained feet. It wasn't a lecherous gaze. It was something far more unnerving. It was the look of a connoisseur examining a rare, flawed artifact, trying to discern its true worth. Kalen finally found his voice, though it was a strangled, pathetic thing. My king, he stammered, still on his knees. Forgive me, I did not know. She is of no importance. A wolfless omega, useless to the pack. A blight. If you desire a female, I have strong, healthy she-wolves who would be honored. Aldrich didn't even turn his head. His eyes remained locked on me, yet his next words were aimed at Kalen with the deadly precision of a thrown knife. You would offer me your finest hounds, he rumbled, his voice low and laced with contempt, when I have already chosen. He paused, letting the insult sink in. And you call her a blight. A low, dangerous growl began to build in his chest. It was not the theatrical snarl of a pack alpha like Kalen. It was a deep, tectonic vibration that I felt in the soles of my feet. It spoke of absolute, unrestrained violence held back by the thinnest thread of control. The very trees seemed to recoil from the sound. You stood before your pack and used this female for sport, the king continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a lethal whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the clearing. You sought to display your strength by preying on the weak. Your pack reeks of it. A rot that starts at the head. Kalen began to tremble violently. King Aldrich, I swear it was a mistake. A misunderstanding. Silence. The single word was not loud, but it slammed into Kalen with the force of a physical blow. He clamped his mouth shut, his eyes wide with terror. Aldrich finally tore his gaze from me and pinned our alpha with a look of such profound loathing it made my own blood run cold. I will not suffer an alpha who mistakes cruelty for power. You will remember this night, Kalen of the Blackwood Pack. You will remember the scent of your own fear, and you will remember that what is mine, you do not touch, you do not speak to, you do not even look at. He took a step closer to Kalen, forcing him to cower even lower. If I return to these lands and find your stench still tainting the air, I will remove it myself, permanently. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha King, Kalen choked out, his forehead now pressed to the ground. I understand. The threat hung in the air, undeniable and absolute. The king had just passed sentence, not just on Kalen, but on his entire reign. He had been publicly unmanned, his authority shattered with a few quiet words. Then just as quickly, the storm passed. Aldrich turned his back on the groveling alpha, and his full, terrifying attention returned to me. The world shrank until it was only the two of us, illuminated by the flickering flames. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat a prayer for an escape that would never come. He reached out. I flinched violently, expecting a blow, a harsh grip like the ones I was so used to, but his fingers did not grab or bruise. His hand, large and calloused, cupped my chin. His touch was surprisingly gentle, yet unyielding. He tilted my head up, forcing me to meet his silver gaze directly. Up close, his eyes were mesmerizing. They were not just silver, they were pools of mercury, swirling with ancient knowledge and a deep, soul-weary sorrow I couldn't begin to comprehend. I saw the warrior in them, the king, but beneath that, I saw the wolf, a creature of immense power and profound loneliness. His thumb brushed over my cheek, a feather-light touch against my skin that sent a jolt of shocking heat through my entire body. It was an alien sensation, a tenderness I had never known. His gaze dropped to my mouth, to the small cut on my lip where I had bitten it. A flicker of something dark and dangerous passed through his eyes. "Did he do this?" he asked. His voice a low growl, meant only for me. I was too terrified to speak, but he seemed to understand my silence. I gave the slightest shake of my head. His jaw tightened, the muscle there flexing. He knew I had done it to myself, to stifle my own pain. In some ways, that seemed to anger him more. "There will be no more of this," he murmured, his voice a vow. "No more shame, no more hiding." My mind reeled. What did he mean? Was this a rescue, or was it something else entirely? A possession? He was the Alpha King? He could have any she-wolf from any pack. Proud, strong females with powerful wolves who could give him heirs. Why me, the broken, wolfless Omega? It made no sense. This had to be a game, a lesson for Kaelin, and I was merely the pawn. The thought hardened my fear into a brittle shell of defiance. He must have seen the shift in my eyes, the flicker of resistance in the face of my terror. The corner of his scarred mouth lifted in a ghost of a smile. It was not a warm expression. It was the smile of a predator that appreciated a bit of fight in its prey. Without another word, he dropped his hand from my chin and took my arm. His grip was firm, inescapable. He began to lead me out of the circle, away from the fire, away from the pack, my pack, the place of all my misery, yet the only home I had ever known. A part of me screamed to resist, to pull away, but my body was numb with shock, moving on legs that didn't feel like my own. We walked past the kneeling Kaelin, past the bowed heads of the wolves who had mocked me my entire life. No one dared to look up. They simply stared at the ground as their king claimed the pack's shame and walked away with her. The silence was my vindication and my damnation all at once. We plunged into the darkness of the forest, leaving the firelight and the ceremony behind. The trees closed in around us, their ancient branches blotting out the light of the blood moon. The sounds of the pack faded, replaced by the crunch of our footsteps on fallen leaves and the whisper of the wind. His scent enveloped me, clean and wild, chasing away the last vestiges of the pack's cloying musk. After a few hundred yards, in a small clearing bathed in filtered moonlight, he stopped. He turned to face me, his grip on my arm finally loosening. We were alone, truly alone, surrounded by the deep breathing quiet of the woods. The primal part of me, the part that should have been wolf, screamed that I was in the presence of an apex predator, far from the flimsy safety of the herd. He watched me, his expression unreadable in the gloom. The silence stretched, and my fear began to curdle into a desperate, frantic energy. I had to know. I found my voice, though it came out as a raw, trembling whisper. Why? It was the only word I could manage. Why me? Aldrich stared at me for a long moment, his silver eyes seeming to glow in the darkness. He took a step closer, and I fought the instinct to step back. He was so close now, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He leaned in, not to kiss me, not to threaten me, but to speak so softly that the wind itself couldn't steal his words. His breath was warm against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Because in a forest of howling wolves," he murmured, his voice a low, secret rumble. You were the only one who was truly silent. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his gaze intense enough to burn. And I have been listening for that silence my entire life. His words hung in the space between us, more real than the trees, more solid than the ground beneath my feet. I have been listening for that silence my entire life. It was a sentiment so profoundly opposite to everything I had ever been taught that my mind struggled to grasp it. My silence was my shame, the hollow proof of my brokenness. The pack celebrated the howl, the snarl, the roar of the beast within. Silence was a void, a failure. Yet he spoke of it like a treasure he had been seeking. For the first time that night, a feeling other than terror flickered inside me. It was fragile and wild, a tiny ember-bright spark of confusion. Hope was too strong a word for it. It was more like a question mark, blooming in the desolate landscape of my soul. I don't understand, I whispered, the words raw in my throat. Aldrich's expression softened, a barely perceptible shift in the hard lines of his face. You are not meant to understand it yet. He stepped back, breaking the intense proximity, and the air rushed back into my lungs. We are leaving now. He turned and began to walk, expecting me to follow. There was no question of choice. His claim had been absolute, his power an undeniable force of nature. I hesitated for only a heartbeat, casting a single glance back through the dark woods in the direction of the bonfire. I could no longer see its light or hear the sounds of my pack, but I could feel them. A lifetime of scorn, a web of painful memories. There was nothing for me there but ghosts. Taking a shaky breath, I turned my back on it all and followed the Alpha King into the unknown. We moved through the forest with a speed and certainty that was entirely his. He navigated the tangled undergrowth and shadowed game trails as if the woods were an extension of his own being. I had to half jog to keep up with his long, effortless strides. He never looked back to see if I was following. He simply knew I was there. He moved with an unsettling quiet for such a large man, his footsteps barely disturbing the fallen leaves. His scent was a constant presence, a shield against the familiar smells of my home territory. It was clean, sharp, and primal, the smell of a storm rolling in off a cold sea, of wet granite and ancient pine. It was the scent of power, but unlike Caitlin's, it wasn't tainted with arrogance or aggression. It was simply a fact, like the moon in the sky. And despite my fear, some deep, instinctual part of me found it comforting. A strange, treacherous feeling. After what felt like an hour, the woods began to thin. I saw the distant glow of another fire, larger and more controlled than my pack's chaotic bonfire. As we drew closer, I realized we were approaching an encampment, but one unlike any I had ever seen. Dozens of large tents, made of dark, heavy canvas, were arranged in neat, disciplined rows. Guards stood at the perimeter, clad in dark leather armor, holding spears. They didn't stand in lazy clusters like the wolves of my pack. They stood as sentinels, silent and watchful, their eyes scanning the darkness. When they saw the king approaching, they didn't shout or posture. They simply placed a fist over their heart and bowed their head in a gesture of profound, silent loyalty. Their gazes flickered to me, a mixture of surprise and disciplined curiosity, but no one spoke a word. This was not a pack. This was an army. Aldrich led me through the center of the camp, past a large communal fire where several wolves sat sharpening blades or mending gear. Their conversation ceased as we passed. All eyes turned to us, and a respectful hush fell over the area. They stared at me, at my torn, simple tunic, my bare feet, my tangled hair. I felt a familiar flush of shame rise in my cheeks, but here, their stares were different. They held no mockery. It was pure, unadulterated shock. They were looking at their king, the fearsome Aldrich Vaynor, and then at the bedraggled waif he was leading by the arm. And the two images did not compute. A man rose to greet us, stepping out of the shadows of the largest tent. He was tall and lean, with hair the color of sun-bleached sand, and eyes as gray as a winter sky. Scars marked his face as well, though fewer and finer than the king's. He moved with the easy grace of a born warrior, and his posture radiated an authority second only to Aldrich's. "My king," he said, his voice a calm, steady baritone. He dipped his head respectfully before his gaze fell on me. His gray eyes narrowed slightly, taking in my state with a clinical, assessing glance. "You have returned." "Valerius," Aldrich acknowledged with a nod. "This is Elihra. She is with me now. Find her some clothes, something warm, and boots." The man, Valerius, blinked once. It was the only sign of his surprise. "Of course, my king." His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw the question in them, the same question that was screaming in my own mind. "Who are you? What are you to him?" "She will stay in my tent," Aldrich continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. He started walking again, pulling me gently toward the largest of the structures, which stood slightly apart from the others. He pushed aside the heavy canvas flap and gestured for me to enter. I ducked inside, my heart pounding. The interior was surprisingly spacious. Thick fur pelts covered the ground, making it soft and warm. A low cot was piled with more furs. In the center, a small contained brazier glowed with embers, chasing away the chill of the night. A large, scarred wooden table stood to one side, covered in maps held down by daggers and polished stones. The air inside smelled of him, that scent of storm and stone, but also of leather, old parchment, and something faintly herbal, like dried sage. It was the scent of his life, his world. Aldrich entered behind me, letting the flap fall closed. The sounds of the camp were immediately muffled, creating an intimate, unnerving silence. We were alone again. He gestured to a wooden stool near the brazier. "Sit," I obeyed, perching nervously on the edge of the seat. I wrapped my arms around myself, a defensive posture I'd held for most of my life. He watched me for a moment, his silver eyes seeming to absorb every detail in the flickering light of the embers. "You're cold," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He turned to a large chest at the foot of his cot and pulled out a heavy cloak woven from dark gray wool and lined with what looked like black wolf fur. It was huge, clearly his own. He walked over and draped it around my shoulders. The weight of it was immediate, a heavy, comforting pressure. It was imbued with his scent and the lingering warmth of his body. A shudder racked my frame as the warmth began to seep into my chilled bones. It was the first truly kind gesture I had received from anyone in years, and it almost broke me. I had to bite down on my inner cheek to keep from crying. His gaze dropped to my arms, where I was still clutching myself. With a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with the rest of him, he took my hands and pulled them away, revealing the dark, finger-shaped bruises on my upper arms left by Kalen's betas. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so deep it vibrated through the ground. The temperature in the tent seemed to drop several degrees. His eyes, when they lifted to meet mine, were no longer just silver. They were molten, blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. "The ones who held you," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "They did this." I couldn't speak, only nod. He traced the edge of one of the bruises with his thumb, his touch so light it was like the brush of a moth's wing. But beneath the gentleness, I could feel the power coiled in his hand, the strength that could snap bone as easily as a twig. And all of that strength, all of that fury was on my behalf. It was a staggering, terrifying realization. No one had ever been angry for me before. "They will not touch you again," he vowed, his voice a raw whisper of promise. He held my gaze for a long moment, the fire in his eyes slowly banking, replaced by that intense, searching look. "They looked at you and saw a broken toy for their amusement. Fools." He shook his head, a small, sharp movement. "They were blind. They saw the absence of a wolf, but they never saw the fire burning underneath." There it was again, that same sentiment. He saw something in me, something I had never even dared to imagine was there. A fire. Me. I was a creature of ash and ice. the dying embers of a failed bloodline. What fire could I possibly possess? And yet, when he looked at me, when he spoke those words, I felt it. A flicker, a tiny, defiant warmth in the deepest, most frozen part of my soul, a spark in the ashes. The tent flap opened, and Valerius entered, carrying a neatly folded pile of clothing and a pair of soft leather boots. He placed them on the cot, his movements efficient and quiet. He avoided looking directly at me, keeping his eyes on his king. "I have brought what you asked, my king," he said. "Will there be anything else?" "No, leave us," Aldrich commanded, not unkindly. Valerius bowed and retreated, his presence fading as quickly as it had appeared. Aldrich turned back to me, his attention absolute. "Get changed. Rest," he said. "We ride at dawn." He turned to leave to give me privacy. My voice, small but clear, stopped him at the tent flap. "Where are you taking me?" He paused, his back still to me. For a long moment he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a strange, somber weight. "To my home, to a place where silence is understood." He started to push the flap aside, but the light from the brazier caught the inside of his wrist. For a single stunning second, I saw it, a faint, intricate marking on his skin, like a tattoo made of spun moonlight. It was a swirling knot of silver lines, an ancient-looking rune that seemed to shimmer, to pulse with a soft internal light. The moment I saw it, an answering jolt, sharp and hot, shot through my own right wrist. I gasped, a small, involuntary sound. I looked down at my own skin. There was nothing there, but I could still feel it. A deep, resonant warmth, a phantom echo of the mark I had just seen on him. It was a connection, a string pulled taut between us across the small space of the tent. He must have felt it too. He went still, his hand frozen on the canvas flap. Slowly, he turned his head, and his silver eyes met mine across the shadows. They were wide with a dawning, incredulous recognition, as if he was seeing me for the very first time. He looked from my face down to my wrist, then back again, and the last of his composure seemed to fall away, replaced by an expression of pure, raw, undisguised awe. The moment stretched, taut and shimmering as a spider's thread in the moonlight. The air in the tent became thick, charged with an energy that crackled and hummed just beneath the surface of hearing. He stared at my wrist, then back to my eyes, and I saw a storm of emotions warring in his silver gaze. Disbelief, shock, and something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. The king, the scarred and feared alpha of alphas, was looking at me, the wolfless omega, as if I were a sacred relic he had just unearthed from the dust of ages. He took a step back into the tent, letting the canvas flap fall closed. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if afraid a sudden movement might shatter the fragile reality of the moment. The heat in my wrist did not fade. It intensified, a steady, pulsing warmth that seemed to beat in time with a rhythm I had never felt before. It was a phantom pulse, a ghost of a heartbeat that was not my own. "The mark," he breathed, his voice a raw, incredulous whisper. "Let me see." It was not a command. It was a plea, stripped of all his kingly authority, leaving only the raw urgency of the male beneath. My hand trembled as I extended my arm toward him, palm up. I was exposing the pale, unmarked skin of my inner wrist. To any other eyes, it was just that, skin, blank, empty. But he wasn't looking with his eyes alone. I felt his focus, his power, like a physical touch, probing, searching. He knelt before me. The Alpha King, who made other alphas bow in the dirt, knelt at the feet of the pack's cast-off. He took my hand in his large, calloused fingers dwarfing mine. His touch was electric, sending a cascade of sparks up my arm and straight to my heart, which hammered a frantic, terrified tattoo against my ribs. He turned my wrist over, his thumb stroking the place where the warmth was emanating. His head was bowed, his dark hair falling forward to shadow his face. I could hear the harsh, unsteady rhythm of his breathing. "I felt it," he murmured. more to himself than to me. The moment I saw you in that circle, a resonance, an echo, I thought I was imagining it. A phantom of a hope I buried centuries ago. Centuries? The word snagged in my mind, a sharp point of confusion. Wolves lived long, but not that long. Was he speaking in metaphors? He looked up, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole my breath. The fearsome alpha king was gone. In his place was a man, a wolf, staring at a miracle he had long since given up on. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice thick with a feeling I couldn't name. The warmth, the pull. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. "It has been dormant," he continued, his gaze returning to my wrist, his voice filled with a dawning wonder. "Hidden, veiled. That is why you cannot shift. It is not that you are wolfless, Alira. It is that your wolf is waiting." The world tilted on its axis. Every insult, every sneer, every ounce of shame that had been heaped upon me for my entire life was built on a single, supposed truth. I was broken, incomplete, a body without a wolf. He was telling me it was all a lie, but his words were so fantastic, so impossible, they sounded like the ravings of a madman. "Waiting for what?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking. His silver eyes met mine, and the intensity in them was a physical force. "For its other half." He pulled back the sleeve of his own leather tunic, exposing his right wrist fully. There, in the dim light of the brazier, I saw the mark clearly. It was not a tattoo. It seemed to be woven from light itself, a swirling silver knot of energy embedded in his very skin. It was ancient and complex, a symbol of power that hummed with a life of its own. As I watched, it pulsed with a soft, silvery light, mirroring the heat I felt in my own flesh. "This is the Vayner mark," he said, his voice low and reverent. "The sign of the first moon. It is passed down through my line from the very first Alpha King, a blessing and a curse. It binds the king to his destiny and to his mate, a mate who is supposed to carry its twin." He looked from his mark to my blank wrist, his expression one of profound, agonizing revelation. Legend claimed the twin mark would be hidden, invisible until awakened by its counterpart. We thought it was a myth, a fairy tale told to lonely kings. My father searched for his entire reign, as did his father before him. For generations, the kings of my line have ruled alone, mated for duty, for heirs, but never for the bond the first moon promised. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I felt as though he were peeling back every layer of shame and fear to gaze upon my naked soul. "And then there is you," he breathed, "a silent omega in a forgotten pack, whose very presence makes a legend breathe again." The sheer magnitude of what he was saying was too much to absorb. Me, the fated mate of the Alpha King, the fulfillment of a forgotten prophecy, the girl they called wolfless and barren was destined for the most powerful wolf in the world. It was a cruel joke, a fantasy too wild to even be a dream. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, pulling my hand from his grasp. "It can't be. I am nothing. I am broken." The words were a shield, a familiar armor of self-loathing I had worn for so long I didn't know how to take it off. "You are not broken," he countered, his voice firm, cutting through my denial. "You are shielded. Your power, your wolf. It has been sleeping, locked away behind a veil, so it could not be found by those who would use it, or destroy it. The prophecy spoke of it. She will walk in silence until the king's shadow falls upon her, and in his presence the sleeping moon will stir." He rose to his feet, pacing the confines of the tent like a caged lion. The quiet, contained man was gone, replaced by a being thrumming with a restless, potent energy. Kalen's pack. They were fools, but they were also a blessing. Their scorn, their neglect, it kept you hidden. If you had shifted, if you had shown any sign of your true lineage, you would have become a target, a prize to be captured, a weapon to be wielded against me. He stopped and turned to face me, his face a mask of fierce, protective intensity. Your silence was your salvation, Alira. It kept you safe until I could find you. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Could it be true? Was the emptiness inside me not an absence, but a presence? Not a void, but a slumbering power of unimaginable scale? For my entire life, I had felt like a house with a locked room. I had rattled the knob, begged for it to open, and when it didn't, I had accepted that the room was simply empty. Aldrich was telling me that not only was there something behind that door, but that he held the key. I looked down at my hands, at the body I had always considered a prison. Could this vessel, which had brought me nothing but pain and humiliation, truly be destined for such a fate? Even if it is true, I said, my voice barely audible. What does it mean? I still can't shift. I have no wolf. Not yet, he said, stepping closer again. The bond is stirring, but it is not yet forged. The awakening has just begun. It will take time. It will take proximity. The way he said that last word, with a low, guttural timbre, sent a shiver of a completely different kind through me. It was a word that spoke of closeness, of scent, of touch. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing against the sensitive skin of my neck. The contact was electric. I gasped, my eyes flying to his. The silver in his irises was swirling, the pupils dilated until they were almost black. The air grew thick with a scent I hadn't noticed before, coming from him, a dark, musky aroma of arousal and possession. The wolf in him was rising to the surface, drawn by the nascent bond between us. The first moon ceremony must be completed, he murmured, his voice husky. It is a ritual that will fully awaken your mark and unlock your wolf. It will bind us, body, soul, and power. His gaze dropped to my lips. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. The urge to lean into him, to feel the press of his mouth against mine, was so overwhelming it was dizzying. I wanted to close the final distance between us, to feel the solidity of him, to confirm that this impossible man and his impossible story were real. But he pulled back, a muscle working in his jaw. He was fighting for control, reining in the primal instincts that were roaring to the surface. He took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened up, putting a few feet of distance between us. Rest now, he commanded, his voice strained but once more the voice of a king. You will need your strength. The journey to the obsidian spire is long, and there are many who would see us fail. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a new fire, not just of possession, but of purpose. You are no longer the wolfless Omega, Alira. You are the future of my people. You are the other half of my soul. And I will burn the world to the ground before I let anyone harm you. With that final, chilling vow, he turned and swept out of the tent, leaving me alone in the flickering light of the embers. My world shattered and remade. I looked at the clothes Valerius had left, the warm wool and soft leather. They were the garments of a new life, a life where I was not broken, a life where my silence was not a weakness, but a song only one wolf in all the world could hear. And as I held my wrist, feeling the phantom heat of a legend stirring to life, I felt the first tremor of the fire he saw in me, finally beginning to burn. Sleep was a distant shore I could not reach. I spent the night wrapped in Aldrich's heavy cloak, my body curled on the unfamiliar furs of his cot, but my mind was a raging sea. His words, his revelations, played over and over, each one a wave that threatened to drown me. You are the other half of my soul. The sheer, impossible weight of it was suffocating. I drifted in and out of a restless doze, haunted by dreams of glowing silver marks and the feeling of a phantom wolf pacing the confines of my own skin. Before the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and lavender, the camp began to stir. The sounds were muted, efficient. The soft clink of metal, the low murmur of orders, the stamp of horses' hooves. It was the sound of a war party preparing to move, a stark contrast to the chaotic, boisterous mornings I was used to in the Blackwood Pack. I quickly changed into the clothes Valerius had provided. A tunic of soft, dark green wool, sturdy leather breeches, and boots that fit as if they were made for me. They were the clothes of a stranger, yet they felt more my own than the thin, ragged dresses I had worn my entire life. They were practical, strong, a uniform for a journey I hadn't chosen but was now irrevocably on. When I stepped out of the tent, the chill morning air was sharp in my lungs. Aldrich was already waiting. He stood beside two formidable black war horses, their breath pluming in the cold. He had shed the leathers of the previous night for a dark, armored tunic, a heavy sword strapped to his back. The rising sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and for a moment, he looked less like a man and more like a figure from an ancient legend, forged from shadow and steel. His eyes found me immediately, and the intensity in his gaze was a physical touch. He swept his eyes over me, taking in my new attire, and a flicker of something, pride, satisfaction, crossed his features. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet morning. "You are ready." He gestured to one of the horses. It was a massive beast, far larger than any I had seen before. Panic fluttered in my chest. I had never ridden a horse in my life. Omegas did not ride, we walked. He must have read the fear on my face. "You will ride with me," he stated, leaving no room for argument. He swung himself into the saddle of the larger horse with an easy, fluid grace. The animal stood placidly, a testament to his rider's complete command. He reached a hand down to me. "Come." His hand was large and calloused, a warrior's hand. Taking it felt like another vow, another step across a threshold from which there was no return. I placed my small, trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, secure. With a strength that seemed effortless, he lifted me up, settling me in front of him in the saddle. My back was pressed against the hard wall of his chest. His arm came around my waist to hold me steady, his hand resting on my hip, with a possessive weight that sent a jolt of heat through my entire body. I was surrounded by him. His scent, his warmth, his sheer physical presence. It was both terrifying and intoxicatingly safe. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I was certain he could feel it. If he could, he gave no sign. "Valerius," Aldrich called out. His second in command was already mounted, his gray eyes watchful. "The vanguard is yours. We ride for the eastern pass. No stops until sundown." "Yes, my king," Valerius replied, his voice crisp. He gave a sharp signal, and the column of mounted warriors began to move, their departure disciplined and quiet. We fell into place behind the vanguard, part of a river of dark-clad wolves flowing out of the forest. Aldrich nudged the horse into a steady trot, his body moving with the rhythm of the animal as if they were one being. I held myself stiffly at first, every muscle tense. "Relax," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my back. "I will not let you fall." His arm tightened around me fractionally, a silent promise. I forced myself to take a breath, to let the tension ease from my shoulders. I leaned back slightly, allowing his body to support mine. The heat of him seeped through my tunic, a comforting warmth against the morning chill. As the miles passed, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. For the first time, I was moving forward, not cowering in place. I was leaving the Blackwood forest behind, and with every hoofbeat, the ghost of my past grew smaller, fainter. We rode for hours in a steady, unbroken silence. The landscape shifted from the dense, familiar woods of my home to rolling hills and open plains. The sky above was a vast, endless blue. I had never seen so much open space in my life. I had never felt so small or so strangely free. Around midday, Aldrich slowed our horse, pulling us out of the main column and into the shade of a small copse of trees near a stream. He dismounted first, then reached up to lift me down, My legs were unsteady after so long in the saddle, and I stumbled, my hands landing on his chest to steady myself. His body was as unyielding as rock. Through the thick wool of my tunic and his own armor, I could feel the coiled strength of him, the steady, powerful beat of his heart. I snatched my hands back as if burned, my cheeks flushing with heat. His eyes glinted with something unreadable. "We will rest here for a short time." He retrieved a water skin and a small parcel from his saddlebag. He handed me the water first. It was cool and clean, and I drank deeply, my throat parched. Then he unwrapped the parcel, revealing dried meat and hard, dense bread. It was soldier's fare, simple and sustaining. We ate in silence, the only sounds the gurgle of the stream and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The silence was not empty. It was filled with 1,000 unspoken questions. I watched him as he ate, his movements economical and precise. I watched the way his eyes constantly scanned our surroundings, ever vigilant. He was a king, but he was also a warrior to his core, never truly at ease, never off his guard. "They will come for me," I said quietly, the first words I had spoken all day. It wasn't a question. His gaze snapped to mine. "Who?" "My pack. Kalen." The name tasted like ash in my mouth. "They will see your claim as a theft, an insult. He will not let it stand." A humorless smile touched Aldrich's lips. "Let him try. Kalen is a pup who mistakes his own barking for a thunderstorm. He is no threat to me." "He is a threat to me," I insisted, a tremor in my voice. "He will not care about your title. He will only care that his property was taken. He will want it back, if only to destroy it to spite you." Aldrich's expression hardened, the brief flicker of amusement gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. "I told you. What is mine, no one touches." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, lethal intensity. "But you are right. He is a fool, and a fool's pride is a dangerous thing. He may try something, but he will not find you. The trail my warriors leave is for him to follow. A diversion." My eyes widened. "And us? We are taking a different path. One that is not on any map." He stood, his meal finished, and looked toward the jagged peaks of the mountains that were just beginning to pierce the horizon. "The journey to the Obsidian Spire is not a simple one. It is a place of power, shielded by more than just rock and ice. We must be there by the next full moon. The ritual can only be performed when its light is strongest." The next full moon. It was less than 2 weeks away, a deadline, a countdown to the moment my entire reality would either be confirmed or shatter completely. We mounted up again, but instead of rejoining the main column, Aldrich turned our horse north, toward a path that was barely visible, a faint track leading into the wilder, more rugged foothills. We were alone now, just the two of us against the vast, empty landscape. The sense of isolation should have been terrifying, but with the solid presence of him behind me, it felt like a sanctuary. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the air grew colder. A deep primal ache began to build in my bones, a familiar phantom of the shift I could never achieve. It always happened as the moon began to assert its power over the sky. It was the call of the wolf, echoing in the empty chamber of my soul. Usually it was a prelude to a night of quiet agony, a reminder of my failure. A soft groan escaped my lips before I could stifle it. Aldrich's arm tightened around me instantly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "It's nothing," I mumbled, ashamed of the weakness. "It's just the coming night. I always feel it. A pull with no release." He was silent for a long moment. Then his hand moved from my waist, his fingers gently finding my right wrist. He wrapped his hand around it, his thumb pressing against the very spot where the phantom mark burned. The moment he touched me there, a wave of warmth and power flooded my system. It was not the agonizing ache of the failed shift, but a soothing, potent energy that flowed from him into me. The pain in my bones receded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum, It felt as if a missing piece of my own energy had been slotted back into place. My wolf, the silent sleeping thing inside me, stirred in its slumber, not with the pain of its cage, but with the first faint recognition of its key. I gasped, my head falling back against his shoulder. What did you do?" "I am anchoring you," he murmured, his lips close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "Your body is beginning to wake up to the bond. Without your wolf to ground you, the moon's pull is painful, chaotic, my mark, our connection. It can lend you its strength. It can calm the storm." I turned my head, and my face was only inches from his. The last rays of the setting sun illuminated the silver in his eyes, making them glow like embers. The world narrowed to the space between us. His gaze was intense, hungry, and it was no longer just the king looking at his destiny. It was a male looking at his female. He leaned in, his scarred face blotting out the sky. My breath hitched. My eyes fluttered shut. I felt the whisper of his breath against my lips, anticipated the press of his mouth against mine. This was it, the culmination of a day of tension, the sealing of an unspoken promise, but the kiss never came. Instead, his lips brushed against my temple. A touch so fleeting, so chaste, it was almost painful in its restraint. "Not yet," he whispered, his voice thick with a control that was costing him dearly. "When I kiss you, Elira, there will be no holding back. It will not be a comfort. It will be a claim. And you are not ready for that. Not yet." He pulled away, and the loss of his proximity was a physical ache. He kept his hand firmly on my wrist, the steady flow of his power a constant, undeniable link between us. He urged the horse forward, into the gathering twilight, leaving me breathless and trembling, caught between the agony of a life I was leaving behind and the terrifying, exhilarating promise of the one that was waiting for us in the heart of the mountains. The moon was rising, and for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of its light. Queen of Embers. The obsidian spire was not a mountain, it was a wound in the sky. A single jagged shard of black rock that clawed at the heavens, its peak perpetually wreathed in mist. Aldrich called it the heart of the first moon, the place where the pact between our kind and the lunar spirits had first been forged. As we made the final ascent, leaving the tree line far below, the air grew thin and bitingly cold, alive with a raw, ancient power that vibrated in my bones. Aldrich's hand never left my wrist. His strength had been my anchor for the week-long journey, a constant, grounding presence against the chaotic surges of energy that now ebbed and flowed through me. My dormant senses were awakening. I could smell the ozone in the air, taste the iron in the rock, and feel the weight of the coming night like a physical cloak. We reached the summit as the last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky. It was a flat, circular plateau of polished black stone, unnaturally smooth, that reflected the darkening heavens like a scrying mirror. In the center of the plateau stood a ring of 7 monolithic stones, weathered by millennia of wind and magic. "This is it," Aldrich said, his voice low and reverent, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "The altar of awakening." He led me to the center of the stone circle. The full moon was rising, a perfect luminous pearl, against the indigo velvet of the sky. Its light was different here, not the cold, distant silver I had always known, but a living, breathing radiance that seemed to pour down into the circle, drawn by the ancient power of the place. He finally released my wrist and turned to face me. The moonlight bathed his features, softening the scars, turning his eyes into pools of pure, liquid starlight. The king, the warrior, the hardened ruler, all of it fell away, leaving only the male, his soul bare and his expression raw with a hope so profound it was painful to witness. "Elira," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "For centuries, my line has carried this power alone. It is a lonely burden. The Vayner wolf is old, fierce. Without its twin to temper it, it walks a knife's edge between king and beast." He reached up, his calloused thumb brushing my cheek. I have spent my life reigning in a storm, but when I am near you, there is quiet, a stillness I have never known. Tears pricked my eyes. To be the calm for his storm, the silence for his roar. It was a purpose so deep, so elemental, it resonated with the very core of my being. The ritual is a vow, he continued, his gaze holding mine, not just between us, but between our souls, our wolves, and the moon itself. It will shatter the veil that hides your wolf. It will forge our marks into one, but it must be freely chosen. I claimed you before your pack to save you, here, on this sacred ground. I will not command you. The choice must be yours. He was offering me an out. After everything, after dragging me across the wilds, he was giving me the one thing no one else ever had. A choice. I could turn back, descend the mountain, and disappear into a new, anonymous life. The thought was a fleeting shadow. To live without this connection, now that I had felt it. To return to the hollow silence after hearing the first few notes of my soul's song. It was unthinkable. I looked at this powerful, lonely king, and I saw not a master, but a partner, my other half. I laid my hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat beneath my palm. There is no choice, I whispered, my voice clear and steady in the ringing silence of the summit. My soul recognized yours in the firelight, even when my mind was blind with fear. I choose this. I choose you. A shudder went through his massive frame. He closed his eyes, a single perfect tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. It was the tear of a man who had finally come home. When he opened his eyes again, they were blazing with purpose. Then let it be done. He guided me to the center of the circle and knelt before me. He drew a small, ornate silver knife from his boot. Blood awakens blood, he said, his voice taking on a rhythmic, ritualistic cadence. He made a shallow cut across his own palm. Blood, dark in the moonlight, welled up instantly. He held his hand out to me. Your hand, Alira. My heart hammered, but I did not hesitate. I placed my hand in his, and he drew the blade across my palm with a surgeon's precision. A sharp sting, and then our blood mingled, his warm and strong, mine a bright crimson answer. An immediate jolt of energy, hot and fierce, shot up my arm, coiling in my chest. He then pressed our bleeding palms together, wrist to wrist, his mark against the place where mine lay dormant. He began to chant in an ancient tongue, the words flowing from him like a river of power. They were words of binding, of calling, of awakening. The moonlight intensified, coalescing into a brilliant column that engulfed us both. The air crackled with energy. A wind howled around the circle of stones, though beyond it, the night was still. I felt the world fall away, felt the very atoms of my being begin to vibrate and realign. And then I felt her. For the first time in my life, the silence inside me was broken. A presence bloomed in the hollow space, vast and powerful, like a star igniting in a dark nebula. She had been there all along, a sleeping giant. And Aldrich's power, his blood, his vow, was the key that was turning in the lock. A scream tore from my throat. A sound of agony and ecstasy, my bones began to break. It was a pain beyond anything I could have imagined, a fire that consumed me from the inside out. But it was a cleansing fire. It was the pain of becoming. Through the red haze of the transformation, I felt Aldrich's arms around me, holding me, anchoring me. His own power was a steady, unwavering light in the storm. I was not alone in the fire. And then the breaking stopped. A new strength, a wild, exhilarating power flooded my limbs. I felt fur, thick and soft, sprout from my skin. My senses exploded. I could smell every stone on the mountain, hear the beat of a hawk's heart circling miles above, see the threads of moonlight as if they were woven silk. I opened my eyes. The world was sharper, brighter. I looked down and saw paws, not hands. Paws covered in fur the color of ash and embers, tipped with claws of obsidian. I was on all fours, my body remade, reborn. I was a wolf. I lifted my head and looked at Aldrich. He too had shifted, but the wolf that stood before me was a creature of myth. He was immense, larger than any wolf I had ever seen, his fur the color of a midnight storm, and his eyes were still the same liquid silver, burning with an intelligence and love that transcended form. A low, guttural whine of pure joy escaped my throat. He answered with a deep, rumbling growl of welcome, of triumph. My gaze fell upon my own right foreleg. There, shimmering against my dark fur, was the mark, a swirling silver knot of power, a perfect twin to Aldrich's, glowing with a soft, steady light. We were bound, complete. He nudged my head with his, a gesture of profound tenderness and possession, and then he tilted his great head back, and from the depths of his chest came a howl. It was not a howl of aggression or dominance. It was a song of pure, unadulterated joy, a declaration to the moon, to the stars, to the world, that he had found his other half. And as his song faded, I lifted my own head to the luminous moon. I drew a breath, feeling the power of my new lungs, the strength of my new form, and for the first time in my life, I answered the call. I howled, my voice clear and strong, rose to meet his, our songs intertwining, weaving a harmony that echoed across the mountain tops. It was the sound of a silence broken, of a destiny claimed. It was the song of the wolfless Omega, who was now and forever a queen.